Upstairs neighbors entitled Hara-sment Escalated from flipping my funny cat sign to tampering with my laundry and terrifying our entire residence. I am a 30-year-old American woman dealing with multiple mental health conditions, including autism, psychosis, and depression, among others. What's important to understand is that these conditions don't diminish my compassion, quite the opposite, actually. I'm incredibly friendly and tend to worry excessively about others, which often lands me in difficult situations. I currently live in SIP housing, supported independent living. I can never remember what the P stands for. It's not an adult foster home, though. Most residents here come from group homes, but I'm somewhat of an exception since I didn't. I ended up here after falling into a severe depressive episode that required additional support. The setup is pretty straightforward. There's one shared washer and dryer outside my apartment, and we have staff present for 12 hours with on-call coverage for the remaining 12. When I first moved in, I was the only woman in the building, and initially, everything seemed manageable. The neighbor in the apartment down the hall appeared decent enough. Let me introduce everyone now, since this gets complicated. Cast: me, just me, trying to get by. Lindsay, staff manager who genuinely cares. Sam, secondary staff member, sweet but limited in what she can do. Owners, the building owners who seem detached from reality. Conservator, handles my finances and was once his guardian. Downstairs neighbor, wonderful 65-plus-year-old lady entitled asshole. My upstairs neighbor who becomes the main problem. Annoying neighbor, lives in the downstairs apartment. Friendly neighbor, shares a wall with my apartment. Now, let me tell you what happened. When I first arrived, entitled asshole seemed pleasant enough. Occasionally, he'd ask to borrow something simple like a bowl, and he was reliable about returning items. But then he noticed something significant: I owned a car. The specifics matter here. I drove a tiny Prius. The problem was that he was far too large to fit comfortably in my compact vehicle, so when he started asking for rides late at night, I consistently declined. His size wasn't the only factor, though it certainly played a role. The real issue was my night blindness. I genuinely cannot see properly after dark, so I absolutely refused to drive during those hours. This is where his sense of entitlement emerged. His demeanor shifted from friendly to hostile in mere moments. Suddenly, he was blasting loud music, deliberately locking me out when I used the downstairs door. Thankfully, I always carried my key, and engaging in other petty harassment tactics. When downstairs neighbor moved in, he attempted the same manipulation with her, except he discovered she used cannabis, so he shifted his requests from car rides to sharing her supply. I was still the only resident with a personal vehicle besides staff members. Downstairs neighbor and I developed a wonderful friendship, often cooking meals together. Like clockwork, he would materialize the moment he detected food preparation, shamelessly begging for meals. I consistently refused to feed him since he never contributed to shopping, preparation, or cleanup. The office cat situation was particularly disturbing. He would dump water on the poor animal, threaten to get rid of it, and generally terrorize the creature until Lindsay, who owned the cat, finally gave it to her daughter when she moved to a pet-friendly location. The cat had been staying at the office because Lindsay's dogs at home kept trying to attack it. The office was supposed to be a safe haven where the cat could receive attention without facing mortal danger. Then downstairs neighbor's keys mysteriously disappeared. She found it strange, and after several days, they reappeared just as mysteriously. However, she began catching entitled asshole breaking into her apartment. Despite my suggestions to call the police and my offers to help, she declined and simply started refusing him entry before finally having her locks changed. Then came the sign incident. I had initially put up a sign on my door that people could write on when I started working from home. This lasted only a few months before my mental health deteriorated and I had to quit, but it served as a simple way to communicate when I shouldn't be disturbed. After I stopped working, it seemed harmless enough, but then I found the perfect replacement. At a craft show, I discovered an adorable sign that read "My cats and I talk shit about you." I found it absolutely hilarious and purchased it immediately, thinking it was perfect since I have 2 cats. I started noticing that sometimes my sign would be flipped around when I returned from shopping or woke up in the morning. Strange, but I'd simply flip it back. Then entitled asshole escalated by writing directly on my door, "Cause issues for me, I'll cause issues for the town." I immediately went to Lindsay and showed her. She confirmed it was his handwriting and sent photos to the owner. The owner's response? He told me to remove my sign. I reluctantly complied and also removed the pen from my erasable board so he couldn't write threatening messages anymore. Interestingly, he was never asked to remove his handwritten blink security sign positioned directly under his peephole. The harassment intensified from there. He began turning off the only lights in the hallway, swearing at me whenever I passed him, glaring menacingly, and lurking near my door. I could see his shadow through my tinted and distorted plastic panel whenever he positioned himself outside my apartment. Then he started targeting my laundry. Not because I was leaving it too long in the machines. I had literally just placed my clothes in the dryer and heard someone tampering with the machine just 5 minutes later. I had another load running in the washer simultaneously. When I went to investigate, he was blocking the door. He had removed my laundry and thrown it on the floor before putting his own in the dryer. Caught red-handed, he quickly pulled his clothes out and attempted to replace mine, though he missed several pieces. When I emerged, I discovered he had switched the dryer to a completely different setting, and my still wet laundry was partially scattered on the ground. I filed another complaint with Lindsay, who spoke to the owner. Instead of addressing this person's behavior, the owner assigned us specific days for laundry. Friendly neighbor had been exiting her apartment during this incident and witnessed everything, confirming the details afterward. Minutes later, he repeated the same behavior, so I confronted him and told him to stop. He responded with profanity and stormed off. I should note that I called him out through my closed and locked door. I wasn't about to face this large man directly when I'm a small woman. Then the fire alarms began. Yes, the fire alarms. Our building is extremely old, and the fire alarm wiring on the top floor is interconnected. If entitled asshole decided to set off his alarm at 3 a.m. by pressing the button, it triggered alarms for all of us, myself, friendly neighbor, and him. I complained again, and Lindsay and Sam did what they could, but after a week without sleep, it finally stopped. However, the damage was done. I had developed insomnia from fear of sleeping, as sudden loud noises caused me to become paralyzed. Entitled asshole then perfected a new strategy. He would wait until just before noise violation laws could be enforced, then blast his music in bursts, stopping precisely when I could legally call the police. This became a recurring pattern, and sadly, staff couldn't intervene because the owner simply instructed us to call the police ourselves. During a group shopping trip, I decided to buy drinks for us women. He was in the car, behaving extremely rudely, slamming doors, glaring at me, swearing when no one else was around. So I didn't purchase one for him. When we returned and were carrying food upstairs, he shoved annoying neighbor as she was helping me. We had reached the door leading upstairs, I unlocked it, and he stormed down, shoved her, then slammed the door behind him. Since the door auto-locks, I had to unlock it again for her. A few days earlier, he had shoved me as well. We didn't know how to respond, so we just continued with our day. The light manipulation continued, and my door was nearly broken into at 2 a.m. We called the owner again with no response. Downstairs neighbor informed me that entitled asshole had been making disturbing statements about being a tester for God and other unhinged remarks. Still, nothing was done. Finally, I had my first panic attack. I had never experienced one before and ended up in the ER. I returned home, settled into bed, slept for a few hours, and then it was my designated laundry day. Going to start my laundry, I noticed something that broke me completely. He had deliberately put his laundry in on my assigned day, intentionally trying to provoke me. I finally reached my breaking point. I had endured enough. I went to Sam asking what she could do, and she said she was powerless to help. Before anyone criticizes Sam, I questioned her further later. She wasn't afraid for herself, she was afraid because there isn't 24/7 staff coverage. She was afraid for me. I just wanted clean sheets, and I couldn't even secure that basic necessity. I called the owner sobbing, explaining everything that had happened. Nothing changed. My insurance called the next day asking about the ER visit. They're sending me an emergency button. I called my conservator, who was his former guardian, and expressed my fear for my own safety as he's become increasingly unhinged. She told me to call the police. I had an annoying neighbor make the call a few hours ago, and while no one has visited yet, we will be filing a police report. I told my doctor about the situation, and she wants my psychiatric professional to evaluate me for medication to help with my fear, as I'm growing increasingly frightful and consumed by dread. Lindsay refuses to be around him because she's afraid of him, though she hasn't stated it directly. You can see her tense whenever he appears. Sam has tried to comfort me. Every woman in this 6-person residence, all 4 of us, are terrified of him. Finally, we called the owner and his brother, and they're trying to figure out what to do. My mental health caseworker is searching for a new place for me to live in case we can't get him removed from here. Update 1: Things have escalated dramatically since my last experience with my entitled neighbor, and honestly, I'm terrified of what he might do next. I've contacted the police multiple times, but they keep telling me their hands are tied. Tomorrow, I'm finally taking matters into my own hands and filing for a restraining order against him. I've been doing everything possible to avoid any contact with this man, but today he made that impossible. He positioned himself right outside my door and launched into a vicious tirade about my appearance, calling me fat and ugly, claiming I couldn't get laid if I tried. He boasted about being such a catch, which is laughable, and said he wouldn't pay anyone to sleep with me, let alone assault me. The worst part? He said even a dog wouldn't want me. He was deliberately shouting my name while pretending to be on a phone call, making sure his voice cut through my noise-canceling headphones. I couldn't take it anymore, so I hurried down to my kind neighbor's apartment and dialed 911. After explaining the entire situation to the dispatcher, I got the same response as always: there's nothing they can do, and I need to file through the courts. That's exactly what I'm doing. This harassment has been relentless. He screams at all hours, anywhere from 11 a.m. to 3 a.m., pounds on my door, and terrorizes everyone in the building. The maintenance staff had to install locks over the light switches because he kept flipping them on and off constantly. Recently, he even targeted one of the workers by drilling 2 screws into her front tires. When she drove home, both tires went flat. Thankfully, her family stepped in to help her out. We're doing everything within our power to address this situation, but the landlord seems completely indifferent, and I'm struggling to find alternative housing. I'm actively searching, though. There's more drama brewing with another neighbor, the one who tried to freeload off my groceries after physically pushing me. She decided to call animal control on me, fabricating stories about animal abuse. I take exceptional care of my cats, and one had literally just returned from a vet visit the day before her call. She admitted to my good neighbor that she lied to animal control, actually bragging about it. I swear, my life has turned into some twisted soap opera. Update 2: the situation had calmed down somewhat, but now it's taken a destructive turn. However, there's finally a glimmer of hope on the horizon. For those following my story, I'm sorry to report that things have gotten significantly worse. The PPO was denied, but he had been leaving me relatively alone, aside from doing laundry during prohibited hours without consequence. He would nitpick every little thing, harass me constantly, chase me off the porch, and try to intimidate me at every opportunity. Yesterday, however, he crossed a line and actually attempted to attack me. I should mention that where I live, they dispense medications, and each resident gets exactly 15 minutes with staff to discuss their needs. I had arrived and was reviewing some rental assistance forms to help me secure a new place. I've been constantly adding myself to waitlists, but I was denied for not earning $2,400 monthly. I only make around $1,400. He barged in right after me, demanding I leave immediately. I hadn't even taken my medication yet. When I politely explained it was my scheduled time, he exploded into a screaming fit. I quickly shut a door between us and retreated back to my caretaker for safety. He nearly succeeded in kicking down the door. There's a massive dent in it now, and he completely destroyed the molding around the frame. The police were called, but once again, they claimed they couldn't take action. I was already living in fear because he had been screaming about wanting me to move, wanting me gone, claiming this was his place. Then, while my caretaker and I were out trying to get some supplies to help me settle down, I received threatening texts. He was planning to hurt me. He told everyone he was going to get even, that he was going to physically hurt me, and that he was going to make me pay. When the police returned and I expressed my fear, I was ready to flee to Pennsylvania where a friend offered to take me in, but I had no way to get there. I spent a night alone in a hotel without my cat, since they wouldn't allow pets. When I woke up the next morning, my caretaker sent me incredible news. I was next in line for an apartment. I called them immediately, and while I wasn't quite up yet, there were only 5 people ahead of me for 4 available apartments. From what it sounds like, 2 people have already decided against it, so I'm almost guaranteed this place if they don't call by the 25th. When the police heard I was planning to move, they promised to speak with the chief to provide whatever assistance they could. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that everything aligns, and by the end of this month, I'll finally be free. I honestly can't continue living like this. I'll keep everyone updated as things develop. Update 3: the past few days have been absolutely brutal. I hope you're prepared for an emotional roller coaster. This is the 3rd update about an incredibly toxic situation that's consumed my life. After I left, I received the letter I mentioned. It appears that at least 2 people dropped out of the running, most likely leaving the apartment available for me. I completed all the paperwork and submitted it yesterday. After I spent that night in the hotel, he was taken in for a psychiatric evaluation. I enjoyed 3 blissful days of peace, though my caretaker wasn't so fortunate. He called and threatened her, demanding that the building owner bail him out, among other things. On the 4th day, I received a frantic call from my caretaker. He's going to be here any moment, I just got a warning call. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, I got a text from her, call 911. I immediately dialed emergency services, and the police arrived quickly. While we waited, I called to check on her. He had cornered her in the office, screaming in her face. She only had her phone with her but couldn't call for help without potentially making him even more aggressive. She managed to text me before calling the landlord, as he was demanding. When he finally released her, I had just called to check on her condition. She was trembling, her voice shaking as she ran to her car, telling me to lock my doors. They already were. The police couldn't arrest him since he hadn't physically touched anyone. I stayed at my family's house that night, then returned to my complex. They obtained a court order to bring him back for the psychiatric evaluation. 6 hours later, he was released again, right in the middle of the night. I thought I was hallucinating when I heard his voice last night, but the male caretaker confirmed it. Hey, I just got a call. Apparently he was released. I immediately called my caretaker. I'll get PPO forms and print them off. I'll have the male caretaker take me to the courts. After handling that, I returned and waited for her to come back. I told her I wanted her to quit. She helps me tremendously, and with my autism and other conditions, I need the support. But I care more about her safety than my own needs. I called my sweet neighbor who lives next to me and told her to stay with her family. She was panicked but agreed. My elderly neighbor is visiting family. The neighbor who tried to get my cats taken away was evicted. The other male neighbor never leaves his room except for medication and has 2 exits, so he can get out safely. This leaves just me and my 1 cat. If you've been following my story, I forgot to mention that I had to put down my big girl on the 14th of last month. It was devastating. I'd never euthanized a pet before, and I hated myself for it, but cancer was killing her. So yes, a lot has been happening. On a positive note, I'm waiting to hear back about the apartment. Wish me luck. I should know next week when their paperwork is delivered on Saturday. Update 4: hopefully, this will be my final update. He continued his creepy behavior since my last post, invading my personal space and lurking around me and my sweet neighbor when I was trying to give her a pair of shoes, staring at us through his door. He was closing the hallway door so he could hear if someone had to open it. I went to a restaurant one day, with my caretaker planning to join me shortly after. I spotted him harassing the wait staff, the same people who had gotten him fired because he'd been sexually harassing all the women workers and then threatening them when told to stop. They told me they didn't want him there, but he was putting on a show of force to intimidate people. The waitress was incredibly sweet and ready to call 911 if he came anywhere near me or my caretaker. Fortunately, he didn't. He's been arrested, not just sent to mental hospitals this time. Yesterday, after he went to the ER, he traveled to a nearby city to threaten the Jamaican workers who come here for employment. The police had finally had enough and arrested him. Hopefully for good this time. I walked downstairs to see 3 police officers positioned strategically as they waited for my caretakers. The landlord had sent his sons here to protect my caretaker. They'd been here for several days, and hopefully, they won't be needed again. Shortly after, I hid in my neighbor's apartment with another friendly neighbor, the sweet one from upstairs, and we watched the police drive away after one patrol car disappeared. I received a text thinking he was just being dragged back to the mental hospital. No, they booked him and are pressing charges. Assault, battery, and more. I hate to say this, but he'll likely hurt someone in jail. If I'm lucky, he'll be denied bail and won't get out for a long time. Yes, I'm still moving. The landlord has proven he's incapable of handling this situation properly. Hopefully, my saga is finally finished. I'll update if it's not, but for now, I can actually sleep peacefully. Update 5. Great news, he's in jail. He was released on bond but violated it immediately. He's now in jail until his sentencing. He did a lot of things between then and now that I meant to document, but honestly, so much has happened in my life that I just wanted to give a quick final update. My new apartment is secured, I've been accepted and will move as soon as it's ready. I mean, what more could I ask for? I'm packing boxes, spending quality time with my cat, and getting on with my life. Update 6. It's been a while since my last update. This is definitely the final one. He was arrested as you all know, and during this time, I constantly monitored the scanner page for our area. We'd see posts about an inmate starting fights, resisting cell placement, escaping his cell, and having issues with a restraint chair. My caretaker visited me recently and finally told me what happened with the verdict, not guilty, due to insanity. However, this doesn't mean he got off scot-free. As soon as a bed becomes available, he goes into a mental institution. Hopefully, he either gets well or stays there until I'm old and gray. I did end up moving. It's a wonderful place here, and Willow and I are happy. I've finally started socializing and having fun again, and I've been playing a lot of my games. Everyone says I sound much better and more relaxed. Update 7. I never thought I'd be writing another update, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It's been 6 months since I moved to my new apartment, and honestly, I thought this chapter of my life was finally closed. I was wrong. Last week, I was at the grocery store picking up cat food when I noticed someone familiar near the checkout. My heart nearly stopped. It was my former caretaker, but she looked different. Thinner, more anxious, constantly checking her phone. When she saw me, her face went pale. "Oh my God, I wasn't sure if I should reach out," she whispered, pulling me aside. "I need to tell you something important." Apparently, about 3 weeks ago, she started receiving letters. Not just any letters, they were from him. Somehow, he'd been writing to her from the mental institution, and the content was disturbing. He was asking detailed questions about my new address, my daily routines, even what kind of car I drive now. The letters were becoming increasingly obsessive, filled with promises that he would find me and finish what we started. But here's the terrifying part. The most recent letter was postmarked from our local area, not the institution. My caretaker had been too scared to tell anyone, thinking maybe she was overreacting. She'd been carrying this burden alone for weeks. We immediately drove to the police station together. After reviewing the letters, the officer's expression grew serious. He made some calls and discovered that there had been a clerical error. Apparently, he'd been transferred to a minimum security facility 2 months ago and had been granted supervised community visits that somehow escalated into unsupervised ones. The worst part? The facility had lost track of him during one of these visits 4 days ago. 4 days. He'd been missing for 4 days, and nobody thought to notify anyone who might be in danger. My hands were shaking as I called my landlord about upgrading my security. While we were talking, my caretaker got a call from Sam, my former secondary staff member. She was crying, barely coherent, but managed to get out that someone had been lurking around my old building, asking questions about me. The description matched him perfectly. I've had to take emergency leave from my part-time job. The police have assigned me a protective detail for the next 72 hours while they try to locate him. I'm staying with my family again, and poor Willow is stressed from all the moving around. But there's something else, something I discovered yesterday that's been eating at me. While going through my old paperwork to give the police more information about our previous interactions, I found something disturbing in my medical records. Remember how I mentioned having that first panic attack and ending up in the ER? Well, the intake notes mentioned that I'd been accompanied by a male friend who seemed very concerned. I never had a male friend with me. I went alone. The timestamp on those records shows he was somehow at the hospital the same night I was there. Either he followed me, or worse, he had something to do with why I ended up there in the first place. The thought makes my skin crawl. My conservator is now involved, and she's furious. Apparently, there are protocols that should have been followed when he was moved facilities, and none of them were. She's already contacted a lawyer about potential negligence, but right now, I just want to feel safe again. I've been jumping at every sound, checking my locks obsessively, and I can barely sleep. The police said they're doing everything they can, but I can't help feeling like I'm back where I started, afraid and looking over my shoulder constantly. The irony isn't lost on me that I finally found peace, started rebuilding my life, and now I'm right back in survival mode. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly be free from this nightmare. I'll keep everyone posted if there are any developments. Right now, I'm just trying to take it one day at a time and trust that the system will work better this time around. Update 8. I wish I could say things got better after my last post, but this situation has taken turns I never could have imagined. The police found him 3 days after my last update. He'd been staying at a homeless shelter about 20 miles away, using a fake name. When they brought him in, he was cooperative, almost eerily calm. Too calm. That should have been my first red flag. He was returned to the facility, but not before I learned something that made my blood run cold. During his supervised visits, he hadn't just been wandering around aimlessly. He'd been methodically visiting places connected to my life, my old doctor's office, the grocery store I used to frequent, even the craft store where I'd bought that stupid sign that started so much trouble. The facility staff claimed they had no idea, but security footage from multiple locations showed him asking detailed questions about me to employees. But here's where it gets really twisted, and I'm still processing this myself. Remember my conservator? The one who used to be his guardian? Well, she called me last Tuesday with news that left me speechless. Apparently, she'd been getting calls from a woman claiming to be his sister, someone she'd never heard of before. This sister had been asking for my contact information, saying she wanted to apologize on his behalf. My conservator was suspicious, so she did some digging. Turns out, there is no sister. The calls were coming from a woman named Rebecca who worked at the mental health facility. Not just any worker, she was one of his counselors. And she wasn't just calling my conservator. She'd been calling him nightly, sometimes for hours. Phone records showed over 200 calls between them in the past month. When the facility investigated, they discovered she'd been passing along information about me that she'd gathered from his therapy sessions. Worse, she'd been encouraging his obsession, telling him I was clearly still thinking about him and that some people just need more persistence. Rebecca was fired immediately, but the damage was done. She'd given him details about my new apartment complex, my work schedule, even the fact that I'd been seeing someone new. Which brings me to the most complicated part of this whole mess. I met David at a coffee shop near my apartment about 2 months ago. He's everything my nightmare neighbor wasn't: gentle, respectful, patient with my anxiety. We'd been taking things incredibly slow, and I hadn't even told him the full story about my living situation. But last week, he started receiving strange messages on social media. Someone was sending him photos of me taken from a distance, walking to my car, coming home from work, even sitting by my window with Willow. The messages were taunting him, calling him the replacement and warning him that she'll never be safe with you. David brought the messages to me, and I broke down completely. I had to tell him everything, about the harassment, the threats, the fear I'd been living with. I was terrified he'd run, and honestly, I wouldn't have blamed him. Instead, he held me while I cried and said something I'll never forget: nobody deserves to live in fear. We'll figure this out together. The next morning, David's car tires were slashed. All 4 of them. There was a note tucked under his windshield wiper: "This is what happens when you don't listen." That's when I realized Rebecca wasn't working alone. The facility's investigation revealed she'd been in contact with someone else, someone who'd been visiting him regularly under the guise of being a spiritual counselor. This person had been helping coordinate the harassment, using Rebecca's inside information to orchestrate a campaign of intimidation. The spiritual counselor turned out to be annoying neighbor. Remember her? The one who tried to get my cats taken away before being evicted? Somehow, she'd connected with him after I moved and had been feeding his obsession while pretending to be a religious volunteer. When police raided her new apartment, they found a disturbing shrine dedicated to our old building. She had photos of all of us residents, detailed schedules of our daily routines, and notebooks filled with what she called observations. But most disturbing were the love letters, dozens of them, written to him, expressing her devotion and promising to help him win me back. It turns out she'd been orchestrating this whole thing out of some twisted jealousy. She'd convinced herself that he and I had been in some kind of relationship, and she wanted to break us up so she could have him. The delusion was so complete that she'd created an entire fantasy where I was the obstacle to their happiness. Both Rebecca and annoying neighbor have been arrested. He's been transferred to a maximum security facility with no visitor privileges. But the damage to my sense of security feels irreparable. I've had to move again. David helped me find a place in a completely different part of the state. We're basically starting over, and while I'm grateful for his support, I hate that this nightmare has consumed what should have been a happy new relationship. The scariest part is wondering who else might be out there, influenced by his obsession. My conservator has hired a private investigator to look into anyone else who might have been in contact with him. So far, we've found 3 more people who received calls from Rebecca, though thankfully none of them took the bait. I'm trying to rebuild my life again, but I jump every time someone knocks on my door. David has been incredibly patient, but I can see the strain this is putting on him too. We're both looking over our shoulders constantly, and it's not fair to either of us. The legal proceedings are ongoing, but my lawyer says the facility's negligence makes this a slam dunk case. Not that money can give me back my peace of mind, I just want to feel safe again, to not wake up every morning wondering if today will be the day it all starts again. Willow seems to be adjusting better than I am, though she's definitely more skittish around strangers. David bought her a new cat tree for our new place, and seeing her play happily is one of the few things that makes me smile these days. I'm hoping this really is the end of it this time. But I've learned not to count on anything when it comes to this situation. All I can do is take it one day at a time and try to reclaim some sense of normalcy. At least now I know I'm not facing this alone.